Sir Duncan the Tall. 4 pages for Sir Duncan. He must have been quite a man.
So they say.
I know exactly what you're thinking. I quit Game of Thrones because of the final season. There's no way I'm watching another series set in that world. That reaction, that's exactly why A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms exists. Because this isn't trying to be Game of Thrones. It's not chasing bigger battles, louder dragons, or shock value deaths. In fact, it's doing the one thing the franchise forgot how to do at the end. Slow down, get personal, and let the characters matter again. No armies, no throne games, no world-ending spectacle. Just a knight, his squire, and a version of Westeros we've never actually lived in before. And here's the surprising part. This small, intimate spin-off might end up doing what massive budgets and epic wars couldn't. Restoring the emotional core that made Game of Thrones a cultural phenomenon in the first place. So today, I'm giving you the perfect starter guide to A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, where it fits in the timeline, what kind of story it's really telling, and why George R.R. Martin himself sees this as something fundamentally different. By the end of this video, you'll be ready to experience one of 2026's most anticipated fantasy series, and remember why Game of Thrones was such an impactful cultural phenomenon before its final season. How does A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms fit into the larger timeline of Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon? Let's start off with the basics. We know that Game of Thrones was adapted from George R.R. Martin's A Song of Ice and Fire series, while House of the Dragon is inspired by his book, Fire and Blood. So, what about A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms? Well, they're pulled from something a bit different. Dare I say, a passion project of George R.R. Martin's. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is based on his collection of shorter novellas titled Tales of Dunk and Egg. These stories are much shorter than his others, and much more digestible, meaning while they are just as intriguing as Fire and Blood and A Song of Ice and Fire, the overall tone is comparatively lighter with smaller stakes, making them a relatively easy read. Now, in terms of timeline and where these Tales of Dunk and Egg take place relative to Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, these short stories occur about 100 years before the events of Game of Thrones. So basically, we have House of the Dragon, 100-ish years later, Tales of Dunk and Egg, another 100 years, and then Game of Thrones. For those who've seen both House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones, you know that the former was essentially already spoiled by the latter, since it was a prequel. While Tales of Dunk and Egg, or rather A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, does take place before Game of Thrones, most of this series should come as a surprise, as it is a completely separate story from the other 2 previous works. About 72 years after the events of House of the Dragon, the Targaryen Civil War, better known as Dance of the Dragons, things had been settled for quite some time. While approximately 20 dragons were ridden into battle, only 4 survived, and just 20 years after the House of the Dragon storyline, all of them would become extinct. Meaning, for those of you who were hoping for some fire-breathing action in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, unfortunately, it looks like you will have to wait for House of the Dragon Season 3. How does this affect the characters in A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms? Well, the characters in this story are well aware of the events that have transpired and its adverse effects on the Targaryens' power. Yet, this story won't focus on the Targaryen Empire. As I mentioned, this is going to push Game of Thrones fans out of their comfort zone. What is A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms about? The official synopsis of the show reads, a young, naive, but courageous knight, Sir Duncan the Tall, and his squire, Egg, set in an age when the Targaryen line still holds the Iron Throne, and the memory of the last dragon has not yet passed from living memory. Great destinies, powerful foes, and dangerous exploits all await these improbable and incomparable friends. Irish actor Peter Cloughy stars as Dunk, a squire to a hedge knight, which is essentially a wandering defender of the realm unbound by commitment to any specific house or lord. When his hedge knight, Sir Arlen of Pennytree, dies, Dunk decides to compete in the tourney at Ashford Meadow to earn some money. With nothing but a wooden shield and a rope repurposed as a sword hilt, Dunk soon meets Egg, a young boy who is determined to become Dunk's squire. Season 1 of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, with just 6 episodes total, will adapt the first novella from Tales of Dunk and Egg, titled The Hedge Knight. How is a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms fixing Game of Thrones mistakes? We all know what went wrong in Game of Thrones' final season, but I truly believe that a Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has learned from its predecessor's mistakes. The primary issue with Game of Thrones' final season is that it chose spectacle over story. In fact, Season 3 of House of the Dragon is dangerously close to making a similar mistake. House of Dragon showrunner Ryan Condal has stated that Season 3 is set to be massive. A typical episode of Game of Thrones cost about $6 million, meaning for an episode as pivotal as Blackwater, for example, they had to get HBO to cough up another $2 million. Should Season 3 be as massive as Condal claims it is, HBO may have to pry open its wallets once again. A few battles are likely to take place in Season 3, including the Battle of the Gullet, the Battle of Redbrook, and the First Battle of Tumbleton, all of which are absolutely enormous in scale. Season 3 will come back bigger, better, and bloodier. In fact, Condal let it slip just how much more extravagant this season will be on his podcast, The Stuff Dreams Are Made Of, where he stated, "Every day I walk around there and look at the buildings and what we're building and the things that we're doing and the number of costumes and extras and all that. I knew it was bigger than Season 2, but I don't think I realized by quite how much. Given the amount of time, talent, and resources that were poured into Season 2, I can only imagine how much bigger in scale and production upgrades Season 3 will be. But the question is, will it be worth all of that money? Aiming for something larger than life when what the series really needs is a commitment to its characters' development could give House of the Dragon the same fate as Game of Thrones. Instead of focusing on what was essential and handling their story carefully, the season finale of Game of Thrones gave a Cliff Notes version of George R.R. Martin's books. Any character that wasn't critical got killed off without a second thought, major characters suffered no real consequences despite the ominous "Winter is coming" tagline, and the plot overall was clearly rushed, cramming into a few episodes what should have taken around a season if we're being honest. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is taking a chance and giving audiences something completely different than the franchise's previous stories. It's a street-level Westeros story. Sure, we get to see a few common folk in Game of Thrones, but at last, they'll be the ones in the spotlight in this series. It's Game of Thrones for the everyman, and this intention is made very clear in every aspect of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, right down to the title screens. The creators of the show have traded the thundering orchestral themes and fiery animations for simple title cards complete with medieval typography. This drastic change is no coincidence. It's an intentional storytelling device that tells audiences, this story is different. We're taking things down a notch and we're zeroing in on our characters and letting their stories speak for themselves. No spectacle needed. A former writer on House of the Dragon and co-creator of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms commented on this seemingly insignificant yet incredibly impactful decision, stating, "All decisions came down to Dunk, trying to channel the type of person he is into every aspect of this show, even the title sequence." Ira Parker also told Entertainment Weekly, "The title sequences of the original Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon are big and epic and incredible. Ramin Djawadi's score is orchestral and large and beautiful, and that's not really Dunk's MO. He's played and he's simple and he's to the point. He doesn't have a lot of flash to him." The Game of Thrones franchise started off incredibly strong, but eventually got ahead of itself. Instead of allowing the characters' emotional arcs to carry the story, the writers relied on the scale of the battles in each episode. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has a chance to finally bring this franchise back from the dead, and so far, it's off to a great start. With an 87% on Rotten Tomatoes, critics are saying that this series has finally accomplished what Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon should have done years ago. Do you agree? Are you looking forward to a more character-driven story? What characters from Tales of Dunk and Egg are you most excited to see? Will this be a single-season series, or can we expect more from this storyline in the future? What are your thoughts on House of the Dragon Season 3? Will it fall into a similar rut as Game of Thrones? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more breakdowns just like these. Thanks again for watching ScreenRant, and I'll see you in the next one.